All right, this one was fun, right? Putting this together. We had a spirited set of conversations this morning about it, and Monday. So we started talking. I think the topic was external collaboration using SharePoint and Teams, and we came across the fact that there's a lot more. We could talk about either of those things for probably 2 hours. And this is a 30-minute segment, so we're going to start. We're going to talk about external collaboration across the Microsoft 365 platform with a focus on SharePoint and Teams. And I think the intention is going to be, we want to hear from you, to do a drill down on each of the services. So a subsequent episode on SharePoint, subsequent conversation about Teams, subsequent conversation about all the other 365 services, like sharing things in OneDrive, pretty similar to SharePoint, at least documents, but sharing things in Yammer, external collaboration. So there's lots of room for us to move on this. You know our team well enough to know that we have a bunch of different viewpoints on this, and it's pretty apparent in the prep for this that we're coming at it from really different angles. So we'll start. The way we decided to frame this out is like, let's look at some of the specific use cases and scenarios for external collaboration. Then let's look at external collaboration through the lens of the maturity model. And I think Russell was here early, and Todd and I were kicking around. For those, I think you're all at least passingly familiar with the maturity model, or the concept of a maturity model. We don't all have to be 500. We don't all have to be super mature on everything, but knowing where we are and what some of the hallmarks of that are, and deciding what's important to us to collaborate on, it's just a nice lens for us to look at a topic like this through. Talk about the definitions of external access, the types, and the top level planning that we should be looking at a tenant level. And then if we have some time, we'll talk about planning at a service level. Anything to add to this, folks?
I just don't want Russell to spoil the ending for everybody else, since he was here at the beginning. I don't want him giving away the...
No spoilers, please?
Yeah, please. That's all I'm asking.
Cool.
So Jason made the comment, terminology, external versus guest. So definitely want to try to address that as we're going through.
Yep, perfect. When we're talking about defining external access, we'll definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
Some common use cases or scenarios, right? One-way sharing of content. I have a document that I need somebody to review, a contract perhaps. I might be attaching those to email or attaching a sharing link to an email, or I may set up a document workspace of some sort, like one very basic sharing of content. And these are kind of working up the maturity model as well here, right? Temporary collaboration needs a temporary team that's put together of both internal and external people. Most of our projects at Sympraxis represent these project-based, transient in time collaboration needs. Then there are kind of some more permanent things, client and vendor portals, things for external partnership. A lot of us work in life sciences. There's lots of joint venture R&D projects where R&D teams who work for two different entities are working together and collaborating pretty intensely. And then there's the blended project teams, and this is kind of also with some permanence to it a lot of times. Blended project teams may have, sorry, there's a bit of echo there. Blended project teams may also have not only document sharing, but things like presence, the ability to kind of one-click instant message, desktop share, et cetera, with folks. So there's a broad array of these, and understanding which your use cases are is going to be crucial to kind of defining the planning steps in here, which we'll come to in a moment. Emily did a quick poll for us. How are people doing it today? And a pretty flat distribution, it would appear. Any comments on this?
Mark added a comment onto the poll. I had left out email attachments. Clearly, I am very invested in Microsoft 365 that I completely forgot it. And there was 13 likes. So I don't know if that was likes about, haha, it's funny that a lot of us still do that when we could be sharing better, or whether they agree that they're also doing that. So that might sway our poll numbers a little bit. I'll also, oh, perfect. I see from Jason, my like was a vote. So good to know. I will drop in the poll because it's still open, so still interested in your answers if you haven't voted just yet.
I actually have a comment on that part of it. I heard the other day from somebody at Microsoft that there's some people that have in Microsoft who have basically an permanent out of office on their email that says, if you're sending me an email, I don't check email anymore. You have to reach out to me in Teams. I find that like a little extreme.
when I responded email attachments, by the way, I was not actually joking. I think when we use the individual file links are awesome if the person on the other end understands what that is. Yeah. If I send a link to like my accountant and they click on it and it opens a file in the browser, they don't know what to do with that. So, that's why I send a lot of things as attachments, and I think it's a reasonable way to work with a lot of external people.
Yeah, and I think part of that is we also kind of lose track. The focus of this is obviously, Office 365, but like if I'm emailing something to my mom, like I'm not going to make her jump through all those hoops. I'm just going to send her the file. So context is important. So you working with your accountant, probably the same deal. I can email it and she can download it, or you can send her a link and make her open the browser, make her save it herself, and all. It's all very situational dependent. So I think it's here to stay. We've been doing it that way for 30 years.
I think we've how many Ignite keynotes, Mark, have I sat next to you with, and Microsoft is showing us, immersive mixed reality environments or quantum computing, and we're like, yeah, but half our clients are still emailing files to each other, right?
Right.
In light of all this fancy whiz bang stuff, there's still some basic stuff that works.
Right.
Suits a purpose. So to take that right into the maturity model, the fact that email attachment's at the bottom of this doesn't mean it's wrong. If that's what you need to do to get the job done, you don't need to be a 500 level on document collaboration in order to be successful in your business. But it represents a pretty ad hoc way of doing it. Emily, do you want to speak to this? I think you're really good at kind of addressing this through the lens of the.
We actually have Mark on this one.
Okay.
Because I added the weird boxes. So I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with ad hoc. But if you're thinking about your organization becoming more mature with thinking about how to work with outside parties and do it in an intelligent and consistent way. Like if I'm going to work with my accountant all the time and I want to teach him how to understand links, or I want to work with my accounting company's team and I want to have a place that we work together in a consistent way, that becomes more mature. You're thinking about using things in a more consistent, more predictable, more understandable way. So I think when we send a link to a document in an email, that's totally fine because it solves that immediate problem. But it's not thinking, well, what's my relationship with this person who I'm interacting with? How can I make that relationship better? How can I show a strategic advantage by having a shared site or a shared team where we work together because we're actually collaborating on a work product or something. So it's not necessarily a progression that always goes exactly like this upward from a maturity perspective. But if you think about sort of the planning that goes into things and understanding that we used to call them extranets, and that's really what teams and shared sites end up being is, we're saying this team or this site is going to be a place where we're going to let people from the outside in a little bit more so that we can work with them better. And that, like I said, can be a strategic advantage even now where we see people collaborating all the time.
And there's another look at this, another way of looking at it to hold it up against the maturity model.
Yeah, and we have this in here just to remind everybody, if you haven't been beaten to death by us with the maturity model yet, that you don't necessarily want to be at the top. You probably don't want to be at the bottom. Deciding where your sort of high water mark is when it comes to external sharing is going to vary by the organization and its security needs and its view of working with outside partners and all kinds, culture, all kinds of other things come into it. But if you think about sort of stacking it up against those levels, you're getting the bottom is absolutely that ad hoc sharing. Like, I just do this because it works. I'm going to email everybody attachments because it gets the job done. And then maybe you decide that you want to get up to level 300 so that you're presenting a good united front for how you work with external partners or even temporary stuff that you're doing with outside people.
I wanted to, this is one of the things that Mike and I talked about before we went live. I feel like this slide and then the first point on Mike's first slide, know your use case, That is, to me, the most important part of this whole discussion. And I think our internal discussions about this beforehand kind of play that out, because once we start getting into the complicated stuff, it's kind of fuzzy and there's a lot of places to go and you get lost. And so I think anytime you're like deep into a web page somewhere with a bunch of settings trying to configure something, ask yourself, where am I on the maturity model? If you're 100, that's awesome. Don't be don't judge yourself, embrace it, and just know, I don't need to set all this other stuff up. I'm just trying to get a document out. And then remember what your use case is. And that, so, in the example that I gave Mike is, if you're 3 levels into a Teams admin setting and you're trying to decide whether external folks can use Giphies or not, ask yourself, where am I on the maturity model? I'm at 200. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to send my accountant an email. Probably not the right place for me. And just kind of back yourself out. I think this part and that, it all comes down to that.
Excellent, Greg.
Yes, well done, Greg.
Well, and I think, and then the flip side of that is, if you're in IT or you're in a more technical role, I think it's, a lot of organizations do this. They've rolled out Microsoft 365 and they say, see, you're collaborating better, and nothing goes better. Nothing changes, right? Everyone's maybe putting documents into a document library. So having a way for IT to start to market the capabilities of the platform as business benefits is also a level of maturity. You're not selling, you're providing benefit for free in essence, even if you're charging this stuff back. But you're providing benefits that the organization can take advantage of, but they can only do it if they understand it. And this is a very complex platform, and people aren't even going to know what the things in those purple boxes are unless somebody teaches them how it works.
Yeah, and likely has to teach them more than once. That's something else that we really get frustrated with. I told you how to send a link and how to share it. What? Yeah, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times.
Or you did it. So you did that 6 months ago, and I used this twice a year.
Yeah, exactly.
So teach
and that's the mistake sometimes is, well, then we need a lot of training. It's not training. It's as much a change management problem as anything else. It's making it a part of the fabric of how your organization works, that you're gonna work with external parties in this particular way, or Microsoft is your cheese.
All right, let's talk a bit about types of external access.
Yeah, so I grabbed this one being the token IT guy in the organization, and this is again part of the whole understanding your use case and understanding where you're at in the maturity model and all that. You need to have some passing understanding of the types of external access. And I will be completely upfront that it's probably possible for somebody to very easily stump me about these particular things, because it is confusing, and it's also, again, be compassionate with yourself. We're on this platform that the place we're at with external sharing and guests and all that is not something that somebody sat down and designed and implemented. It's 10 years worth of evolution and technology and all that. So looking at this is kind of tough, but understand what you want to do. Are you just trying to share a document with a person one time? Or is it like the example that Mark gave, where you have a strategic partnership with another company and there's going to be a lot of work going back and forth? One might be a guest, one might be external access, and understanding which is correct is a big thing. And Emily put a great link in there. Just to understand, kind of walk through. And I think that is the one that gives the different, if this is what you're trying to do, yeah, I like this one. So this kind of has at the top, it's not a flow chart, but it is kind of a flow chart, knowing what your use case is. If you just want to collaborate with somebody on a document, do this. If you want to, have them collaborate with the whole team, do that. And it gives you the links to doing those things. So this is a good one. I've got this one bookmarked because it allows you to just, here's what I want to do. And then you can kind of wrangle the technology around that. And there was a couple of questions earlier.
Yeah, and I was just going to actually ask, is this a good place to ask Sherman's question? So so this is sort of an auditing question, right? So when he's saying, when I share a single file with an external user, not a guest, I don't think that identity shows up in the list of guests in the admin center. And I think he is right that I have seen that as well. And so then his follow-up question to that is, how do we know what outsiders have potentially had access to company content? I have this vague recollection that there is some way to see, but I don't remember the conversation or where I saw it. Does anybody have it?
Sort of. So this question comes up a lot, and in times when it doesn't come up, I always feel like it should. This is one of those questions where I'm annoyed when it does come up because I'm like, oh my God, that question again. But then if somebody doesn't ask it, I'm like, you should be thinking about one. So I can't win with me. But basically what people want to know is it's really easy in this platform to share at all these different levels, share a document, share a site, whatever, especially if IT's not on top of it and making sure they've got it controlled. So then how do you find out where that's been done? If somebody in accounting stumbled into a way to share a spreadsheet with somebody and then accidentally, payroll information or something gets out, how can you audit that? So there is auditing built into the platform. The Compliance Center has that. From a quick look, I could not find a way. I did not see an event that you could audit on that was, document shared with external person. That was kind of the first place that I thought to look. I did not see it there. There are some third-party tools that will make those reports for you, and I think they just walk down the tree that which documents have been shared externally is a property of the document of the object itself. And so we've got a couple of companies that we do a lot of work with. ShareGate and Syskit are two of our favorites. And I think they both have an admin tool that will do that for you, that essentially walks down every site, every document library, every folder, every item, and says, are there any external people on here? If so, tell Sherman. And so I think that is a question that everybody should wonder about. And then depending, again, where you're at on the maturity model, figure out how to get that information. Another piece, and I don't remember if I know exactly the scenario that Sherman's talking about, but if you go into Azure AD, you can see Azure AD users, and any external person that you share things with will show up in there as a guest. So that's another way to find out who has access, has some kind of key to get in. It's not going to show you what they have access to, but it will let you know they've been given access.
And Todd, is that like the bad actor scenario?
You know what I'm thinking?
Sorry, go ahead, Julie.
Sorry, my computer just did a little thing that it likes to do. But there's like an inventory list in OneDrive. I'm going to paste the link now, where you can click on a file, and I think this is what Todd's referencing. You can click on a file and then manage access, and it'll show you who it's been shared with. But that's like a file by file basis, and
right.
So and I think this is what I was remembering. But from a reporting perspective, you're right. There is nothing that I've seen out of the box. So we need these third-party partners to sort of give us a way to pull that data up. And I suspect you're right. They're probably crawling the data, or maybe it's in Graph. Who knows?
Yeah. So so it might be in Graph. I've not looked there. My first thought was the auditing logs, the compliance thing, and I was just positive. I would have bet cash money, any of my children's college funds, that there was an event in there where I could see when something had been shared externally, and I could not find it. So Steve Pope mentions that too. Site usage in each site collection has a shared with external users report. Good,
okay, cool. That's a new. I did not know that. That's a new one for me.
Our friends at ShareGate have two out-of-the-box reports: external user report and external sharing report. So again, third-party tools, but there are ways to get at this information.
Yeah. So Steve and Luth both mentioned that sharing report. That's a good one. I had forgotten about those. When I saw Sherman's question, so this is another one of those things where I'm looking at it at a tenant-wide admin level. Those are very much for site collection owner,
Right.
So both valid. I was thinking of a different problem though, but those are a good tool to have in the toolbox.
So Todd, can we talk about, like, if I want to enable external access to some content to a particular party, right? A consultant who's working with us, or a lawyer who needs to review a contract, et cetera. I have options, including creating a domain account for them, right? This is the most intimate, if you will, right? Meta sharing.
Yes.
But there's a lot of lesser ways of doing that with guest access. Can you speak to the options there?
Yeah. So first, I want to start with your one option. So the intimate option that Mike was talking about was we'll use Anderson's example again. I'm going to be working with an accountant, a person on a project, and I just go into my account, my tenant. I create an account for them. I license it up, and that they're in. Like that's it. We've made it official. It's Microsoft 365 official. They're in. That gets all the things, which is great because then all these stumbling blocks that we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides aren't there. They're just in.
Well, it's great except for that particular user. If they have another Office 365 tenant that they use regularly, now they're in that whole unfortunate situation where they have to sign in and sign out of things in a way that's really unfortunate. So
yes,
I don't prefer that method. Like, I don't want people to give me an account, right?
Yep. So that was problem number one that I was going to mention.
Oh, sorry. I stole your cheese.
You stole my cheese, my thunder. Where's my thunder? The good news is I have a second problem. So you didn't steal all of my thunder. So the second problem is there are a bunch of security things inside of Microsoft 365 that are everybody in my company. Share this document, this site, everybody with my company. And so if you create that intimate account, then they are now part of that company. So you can't use those easy groups to share things. Whereas those groups are everybody except guests and external folks. So if you do the other thing, so it's easy because you just know, I just go create a user. But like Julie said, then they have problems with Teams and where's their email go and all these messes. And it potentially opens you up to a security thing. So then the next thing is you can do federation and invite them in. And this starts getting a little clumsy, and I'll admit to being a little fuzzy on some of this. Depending on which product you're using, if you're using Teams or SharePoint, if you want to share a file or a site, or if you want to get them into chat, it does get a little clumsy. I think for the most part, Microsoft has made everybody federate with everybody inside of 365 when it comes to chatting and things like that. But there are different levels. There's a courting process. So if I know somebody's email address, and I assume it's a Microsoft 365 address, I can usually just paste it into Teams and start up a chat with them. And that's kind of the first part of the courting process. We can dance around each other and all that. But if I want to share, if I want to invite them to a team or something like that, then we have to have some of these other things in place that allow me to add people from their domain, all those kind of pieces. So it's kind of working up that stair step.
So Todd, there's the tenant license and the AAD account. Then there's the federation, and then there's probably guest user access too, right?
Yes, and so that's the whole I'm sharing a thing, and they show up as the guest account. And I think that document that Emily posted kind of spells out the differences between those two. That's not the right one. Yeah, that's not. So one of them that I had does a good job of explaining the difference between external and guest.
Got it.
Oh.
That one?
Yes, I believe so. Yes, that's exactly the one. Okay, so that one that Emily just posted talks about what guests can do as opposed to what external, I guess that one's internal folks. But that gives a good experience on or gives a good explanation what the guest experience is.
Is that
Greg
a
had a
resource?
question.
Go ahead,
Go
Julie,
ahead.
sorry.
Greg had a question about where does Azure AD B2B mix in? And I think, isn't that federation basically?
I believe
Or is
so.
it more?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on it, but yeah, in my head. So B2B, for those folks who haven't played in Azure, is business to business. So again, instead of me courting somebody individually, it's some practices doing a big project with Contoso, and our people at the highest levels of each organization get together and decide that we're gonna do the thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it just means that their org has been added to the whitelist of federated orgs. Right. So you don't get the basic sort of out of the box federation stuff that chat works off of. You get a more deep integration.
I believe so. But I will also admit that there are Azure things outside of M365 that I'm not sure how they impact B2B.
Right.
So I can't say for sure.
There's nuances to that I do not understand either. That's deeper than I have understanding.
Yeah, I wasn't sure that was still supported, in fact.
No, it is. It
It
is. Yep. Azure B2B and B2C are still a thing, but they're more Azure-y. It's how auth works, is really for like external apps or apps that you would build on the Azure platform. It's more around how auth can then work with those scenarios. but I don't know how they like I don't know the specifics about how those Azure relationships affect your Microsoft 365 tenant, if at all.
Yeah, Greg just posted a good link about that. B2B is alive and kicking as of a month or so ago. Yep. So in the interest of time, we hit the next slide?
Yeah, sure.
There we go. So this, again, I'm the IT guy, the token IT guy. This is one of the things that gets confusing. We're going to hit this on subsequent episodes of Asks and Praxis. Tune in, put us in your DVR, all that. The permissions and the settings start from the top down, and so you can completely understand how to configure it in SharePoint or Teams if you are the local expert on those things, and it still not work because something upstream has been shut off. So it's important to know that it has to be allowed at the tenant, and then it has to be allowed at the product, and then it has to be allowed at the site, and all of that. So this is kind of talking a little bit about that. Julie mentioned with the B2B thing, there's this idea of the allow list and the block list that you can do for domains. And so you can say things like, we can share with anybody, we don't care. Or we can share with anybody unless they're on the blocked list. Or we can share with anybody, we can only share with people on the allowed list, things like that. But understanding where those settings are and what the error looks like on the product side, if the setting's not correct on the tenant side, is really important, because they're just a bunch of places. It seems like to give access to things, you need to turn it on in 3 different spots. So I think in SharePoint it is 3. It has to be on at the tenant level, it has to be on at the product level, and it has to be on at the site level for like the allow list for domains, for instance. So knowing that, because it can be maddening. You find a blog post, here's where it is in your site collection settings, except it's not there. And then, yeah.
Well, that goes back to the move my cheese piece. Like, I read these blog posts and I'm like, is that screen still exist? And is it where they say it is? Because I don't know if I can find it.
So when I'm king of the world,
annoying.
There's going to be some changes. And one of them will be anything on the web has to have a published date on it. Yeah,
I'm with you. It's super frustrating.
So for that B2B article that Greg just posted, the very first thing that I did was found the date. I'm like, 3/19/21. Perfect. Still valid. It's not from 1997. Great year. Had a lot of fun. But yeah, so I agree that the whole screenshots moving and all that.
More likely to be valid, not necessarily.
yes. The risk is much lower of it being, yes, that's true.
I feel like it's also before Ignite, after Ignite, you notice for documentation is a good one, because you're like, I think we heard something different last week. Sometimes that isn't quite caught up in the documentation just yet.
Yeah. So we got a couple of minutes left. Were there any other slides we wanted to hit before time?
Some planning considerations, some of these we've covered.
Yeah, I think we've covered that scope of sharing a lot. So this idea of figuring out what your use case is and what level of sharing you're going to need, whether it's just that one-time document, maybe some longer-term collaboration, that will help inform your governance and information architecture considerations. As we've already talked about a bit of tracking that document level sharing can be really challenging. So if you're going to have a long-term collaboration with someone, you probably want to be planning for a shared site or something a little bit more robust. You also want to consider, as Mark called out, that user experience for your external party. If I'm sending something to my accountant and it's a one-time share and they're not familiar with that web-based view, email attachment might be that best option for me. So make sure you walk through all those user stories before you dive into changing those settings.
Todd, you had audiences, and I think disabling was one of the like every Microsoft major feature, right? How do I turn it off?
Yeah. So I can't. What was the context of that with guests and external folks? Oh, so did we create an audience for internal folks that expose things? Is that what that was? Was that Emily? Was that you the night that did that? I forget the context of that.
The audiences part?
Yeah.
It was just planning the audiences. Are we talking about specific named organizations? Are we enabling
gotcha. Right.
access by unauthenticated users, et cetera?
Yeah. I thought you were talking about SharePoint audiences. Yeah. So this is, the scope and who the customer is, and just knowing, do I need to turn everything on if I'm just doing this for an individual person, or again, back to Mark's example, if I'm doing an official thing with another company, do we really need to onesie twosie add every person we're going to work with, or do we need to understand that it's, everybody, that company, or is it okay if we leave anonymous access on at the tenant level so I can just send my mom a link to something from work? Knowing, and it's like I said, it's all back to those initial couple of slides. What exactly is my use case, and where am I on the maturity model? I think that guides a lot of my decisions.
I think our intention here was to use this conversation to spur some conversation from you who've joined us on the call, to take the next episode to dive deeper into SharePoint specific external sharing, and to hear from you what's crucial to you, because any of these things could consume a half hour real easily. We wanted to be real clear on that. So are there pieces that we should incorporate into the next conversation, which is very SharePoint specific and a deeper dive about external sharing?
And you could have people just drop stuff in the chat if that's easier, or
yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, if you don't leave the chat and you put the questions in there, we'll tee them up from there too. That's another good.
Yeah. Yeah, so I will look into that auditing thing. I know there's got to be, I think there's probably a better way to get some of that reporting on what's exposed. I'll see if I can find something for next time.
So I think we'll continue to gather from you what's crucial and what you want to talk about in the next session. In the meantime, some of the resources that we put in the chat today, we've put in here as links as well. So when we publish this deck or people watch this on video, they can see these as well. So most of this not service specific, so not specific to OneDrive or SharePoint or Teams, but really platform specific. And then we'll drill in to each of those in the subsequent sessions. So the next one will be SharePoint in 2 weeks. What else ought we to cover in the next one, or should we have covered today? And I'm asking it as much as I'm asking the folks who've joined us. I'm asking this in Praxians too, because now that we've gone through it, how do we make it 10% better next time?
I'm looking forward to, in our next session for external sharing, talking about the difference between Microsoft 365 groups, sharing the site only, SharePoint groups, the audiences where it matters. I know that's a huge point of confusion, and the relationship, even kind of blending it in probably the next topic of the relationship of your SharePoint site with your Microsoft team as well, and what you get in one versus the other.
I think, Emily, when we want to share an entire site versus a library versus a folder versus a document, right? So we're working on a project with a client. I submit invoices and project management reports that have numbers of hours and dollars assigned to that. The whole team doesn't need that, right? Just
Absolutely.
The internal PM and some of the business people. But where's the best place to put that? Is it an ad hoc sharing, share the document one time from my OneDrive? Is it create a shared folder inside of a library on a shared? There's a lot of ways you could attack that. We should approach it, I think, with a couple of scenarios like that.
Absolutely. It'll be one of our favorite "it depends" conversations for sure.
Everybody drink.
Cool. I think we're out of time, so we probably
we're just a touch over. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Let's dive deeper in 2 weeks and tackle the SharePoint specific aspects of external sharing. Thanks, everybody, for prepping and joining. And as always, the feedback and the dialogue is the best part.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. See you.
Bye.